by very beautiful, what they call coincidence. Aurobindo says, the touches of artist, no? The divine has arranged that just at the time when Loretta was planning her exhibition on the teachings of the flowers, Sergei got the inspiration, without knowing about that, to invite Richard, who's the great authority on mother and flowers. And we're just very, very happy that once again you will share all your beautiful knowledge with us.
Thank you. Today I would like to ask the flowers themselves to talk to you. I'm just a mouthpiece trying to bring forward something of the beautiful gift of the spiritual significances of flowers. As I look around, it seems that each one of you is a flower expressing some divine quality. And here we have an absolute abundance of flowers. The special way in which I wanted to introduce today's kind of dialogue with flowers was through the fragrance. Mother says it is largely through the fragrance that she could give the significances to flowers. And I'd like to tell you 3 little stories. They're actually from true life. The first is about a lady called Jyoti Priya, who founded the East-West Cultural Center in Los Angeles. She came to India to study Sanskrit, and of course she went to Benares, and in very hard conditions, because she was not used to sleeping on a hard bed in a little room with nothing else but her books. But she began to experience a strange perfume around her, and that was so soothing that she forgot all the kind of hardships that she had to physically bear with. Later on, she came to the ashram, and when she came here, I don't remember exactly because it's such a long time ago she told this story, but when she smelled the psychological perfection, she remembered that fragrance that had enveloped her in her first days in Benares. I'll tell you another little story which I heard only the other day from Mandakini, who helped us with the compilation of the new flower book in 2 volumes with pictures. And she told me around 1956, around the 29th of February, she was making something in the kitchen. She was making something just with ordinary things, and she didn't know how it would turn out. But she felt suddenly a kind of fragrance. It was smelling sweet. And this remained with her, but she didn't know exactly what it was, and she forgot all about it. When she came to the ashram, and she was charmed by the flowers and the mother giving flowers, she came across a flower called the joy of integral faithfulness. And when she smelled that flower, she immediately remembered the smell that the fragrance that came out of in her kitchen around the special day of the supramental descent into the physical. I'd like to add just a little story about my own experience. When I came here and smelled for the first time the honeysuckle, which Mother calls constant remembrance of the divine, as soon as I smelled it, I remembered exactly where I had seen it, where was the countryside, what was everything about, everything came in a flash back to me. Oh, I smelled this before. And this shows how deep and subtle and, of course, revealing the fragrances are. In fact, in the agenda where Mother talks about flowers, and she's giving this flower of spiritual perfume, spiritual fragrance to Satprem. And she says, when I smelled this, I thought of Shiva doing his tapasya. It was so strong. And she, of course, has given the name spiritual perfume. So this is just to say that we can fill our whole life with perfume. And of course, I must add that artificial perfumes can be sometimes deceiving because they block our sensibility to the more subtler ones which we would experience, for instance, with flowers. Since we are talking about flowers, I would like to bring back this experience that the Mother had while in Japan, when she saw a cherry blossom. And this is what she experienced. A deep concentration seized on me, and I perceived that I was identifying myself with a single cherry blossom, and through it with all cherry blossoms. And as I descended deeper and deeper into the consciousness, following a stream of bluish force, I suddenly became the cherry tree itself, stretching towards the sky like so many arms, its innumerable branches laden with their sacrifice of flowers. Then I heard distinctly this sentence: "Thou hast made thyself one with the soul of the cherry tree, and so thou canst take note that it is the divine who makes the offering of this flower prayer to heaven." When I had written it, all was effaced. But now the blood of the cherry tree flows in my veins, and with it flows an incomparable stream of peace and force. What difference is there between the human body and the body of a tree? In truth, there is none. The consciousness which animates both of them is the same. Then the cherry tree whispered in my ear, it is in the cherry blossom that lies the remedies for the disorders of the spring. Of course, you must be curious about what are these disorders of the spring. But Mother explains later, India, I believe, India gender also, I don't remember where, but she says in Japan they have a habit of taking an infusion of cherry blossoms before the summer, just as we take neem flowers, or we chew a few neem leaves before this summer comes, so that we will not get prickly heat, or we will not suffer too much in the summertime. So she said that is more or less the tradition in Japan, to take an infusion of cherry blossoms so that they won't get little boils or little things to disturb them during the summer. I will talk about some of the flowers that we have here. And of course, the most important one, which I most often see in Savitri Bhavan around this time of the year, I don't know where it grows, but it is, you have a tree here in the garden. Oh, wonderful. Divine love governing the world. It actually, excuse me, it hangs like this on the tree. The tree is the most beautiful little tree with tender leaves. When they open up, they are so fresh and delicate and mottled pink and spotted with little patches. They all open, as far as I know, not exactly, but they all open together. And that happens as though it is, for the mother, this is one flower. Botanically, of course, it's different. For me, it looks like a huge divine love. And divine love is the pomegranate, for those who are not so familiar. I think all of you are familiar with the pomegranate flower that doesn't give fruits. I would like to tell you the little story that Mother recounts, which is extremely touching. Oh, that's me, I'm sorry. When she gave for Kali Puja a little packet, I think that was even before blessing packets really started, of divine love petals stuck on this card on which the story was given. And I'll tell you the story as far as I remember in her words. Long, long ago, in the country of the birth of civilization in Chaldea, there arrived upon earth a being from God. But as usual, he was not understood by men, and he was being persecuted. In fact, he was wounded, mortally wounded. But he wanted to leave his body in peace. So he fled into the desert. He ran away from his pursuers who were after him. And finding a little bush, he hid himself below it. people who were chasing him passed by without seeing him, and drop by drop, his blood fertilized the ground below this little bush. The little bush grew and grew and grew until it bore flowers, of which each petal was a drop of his blood. Mother ends this by saying so sweetly, and this is what we call divine love. I'm tempted to tell you also that the pomegranate is a rather special tree, very special, let us say, being, since we're talking of the same consciousness in us and in trees. It has the flower which gives the fruit. And the flower that gives the fruit, Mother has named the divine sacrifice. Whereas the fruit, which of course all of you have tasted, and if you may have noticed that it is something rather special. It doesn't have the usual symmetry or the usual way of, opening up, but inside you see it in all sorts of strange compartments, and extremely beautifully organized. Perhaps in olden days they just would be split open by creatures, by animals, by men. And the little seeds, of course, have the same color, usually, the bright red or pink. And Mother calls this fruit the divine love spreading over the earth. There is also, I think in the Matrimundi nursery, there is also the white form, pure white, which Mother calls unmanifest divine love. Which always took this name took me by surprise, because I was wondering, what does it mean, unmanifest divine love? And then later, when Mother gave commentaries, which I'll talk about in a moment, she says it is the love that the divine reserves for those pure in soul. So it is manifest. It will be manifest as we grow pure in soul. Some of you may be curious to know about the commentaries which I call, or we call rather, of flowers. And for that I'd like to draw you back to about 1955, when a compilation was made of all the flowers that were to be found and which people remembered, which Mother was using. And this lady, Liselle Raymond, I think the wife of the person who translated the Life Divine into French, she compiled a little book called Le Rôle des Fleurs, with a beautiful and sweet introduction, in which, of course, as Loretta says, the flowers are the connection between the disciple and the mother. Each flower is a mantra that works within ourselves as we climb a ladder of self-perfection. I'm giving you a very poor kind of resume of her little introduction, which is extremely sweet, and I don't think it's been translated into English, There were about more than 600 flowers. And if I take you further back, in going in the opposite way, we come to 1929 when Mother played a game with the sadhaks. She would gather a few flowers in her hand and give them to the few sadhaks, Amal Kiran, Nolinida, perhaps Pavitra, I'm not sure. And they would make a sentence out of the meanings of these flowers, which you would then either correct or give the correct version. This was recorded by Champaklal in his book, Champaklal Speaks. And there we have, already in 1929, can you imagine, more than 100, perhaps 120 flowers already named by the mother. And these little sentences, these little sentences became what we now call the flower language, or the game of the flowers. And since I'm jumping around a lot, I would like to talk about the commentaries. Tara, whom you will see in the little clippings and video of Loretta with the mother, she asked the mother if we could revise the book so that it could come out both in English and in French. So mother consented, and Tara would go to her at a moment when the mother so-called rested. Mother didn't usually rest, but in her resting time she decided to take 5 flowers a day and review them and give a commentary orally, which Tara noted down and showed her the next day to verify whether it was correct. At the same time we asked many questions which were sort of troubling us as to know whether the name was this or the name was that, and Mother clarified many things which helped to build what we have, flowers and their messages. So the little commentaries have given us a greater insight into flowers, in the sense that when you hear a flower like chastity, you think, oh, I must be very pure, I must have no desires, I must not let my lower impulses govern me. In Mother's commentary is quite interesting. She says, if I may quote verbally, quite reserved and a little proud of itself. There are certain touches of Mother's humor. These are not the exact words, mind you, look up the book to find it, but that's the general sense. And take, for instance, when she named the chili flower. You know, the chili, hot chili, spicy. She called it a whipping. In fact, these names were quite recent. Recent in the sense that she gave them around the time she was doing the commentaries. So she says, a little brutal, but necessary sometimes. So we have these little touches of humor. And I remember particularly one flower which I was very fond of because it smells like jasmine, and it is Odia. And it is integral even basis in the physical. So I thought to myself, well, this means I must be equal towards everything and establish that equality in my physical. The commentary, I will tell you, sort of drove out those little ideas. Mother says, what you have, I have. We're all the same. So you get touches of things which either have bouleversé, as they say in French, which shake you up a little, or they make things much clearer to you and often give you a very simple sense of Mother's humor, Mother's touch of the simple and the realities of day-to-day life. I would like to come to the period after the commentaries, and roughly at the same time, but gradually a little later, when the flowers of Aurobindo were brought by Narad to the mother. For that I should tell you that what struck me most when I saw the inauguration of Aurobindo, when we had that ceremony with the earth of different countries being brought, was the exhibition which was planned around the banyan tree. One little placard struck me very deeply, and that was in bold handwriting. It was written, Matrimandir, love, c'était en français, and a line, and then the 12 gardens in which bliss was, I think, félicité. And at the end there was another line, Banyan, unité. Somehow this got stuck in me. You know, things get stuck in you sometimes and they don't leave you. So this sort of remained with me. When later on, maybe 2-3 years later, when the mother was deciding to give the flower of each 12 gardens, in fact those 12 names were the 12 names of the gardens of Aurobindo, around the Matrimandir rather. So she called me. She said very humbly, I don't remember all the names of the flowers, but bring me all the hibiscus you can get, and let's see what we can do. It was very sweet of her because it was she who gave the names and I was supposed to help her. So I told Narad we have to get the hibiscus, and I told the gardeners in the ashram we are collecting the hibiscus. I think it was on a Tuesday. So the first Tuesday I went with a big basket. Narad had brought down from Aurobindo lots of hibiscus. I had a few from the ashram. I brought them before the mother, and Narad insisted that we should have a worker from the garden to come with me to help me carry the basket, which would be a lovely occasion for him also to come to the mother. So this is what was arranged. And in the first session, we had something like this, but only hibiscus. And mother looked around and then she said, what is the first garden? I said, Mother, I'm just talking in English, it was all in French. It is existence. So mother said, but do we have a name of existence? I said, no, Mother, we don't have existence. Then she looked around and saw a beautiful pink hibiscus, single. She said, what is this? So I said, Mother, this is psychic power, power in the psychic. So she said, very good. Let's call it psychic power in existence. Mind you, this wasn't the name she first gave, because the next day she said, no, I'd like to change it, it's not quite perfect. And after 2 or 3 attempts at shifting the words around, she came to psychic power in existence. That was to be the central flower of Sat, existence. The second flower, the second garden, was of course consciousness, Chit. And of course, I told her, Mother, we have supramental consciousness. She said, this golden hibiscus, double. This is perfect. And on the first day, I think we did 3 flowers. The third was, of course, Ananda. That was so simple because we have a flower, Ananda, which is a simple, single hibiscus with an ochre, ivory white flower with a white center. So that was Ananda, that was Félicité. So in 2 or 3 sessions, the next session also, Narad also brought a few flowers which had not been named by the mother, which grew in the garden. And one flower was particularly interesting. I'm just divaguer, as they say in French. This flower is called the Star of Bethlehem. Of course, Star of Bethlehem, there are several different flowers which are called Star of Bethlehem. I know 2 at least. Well, this one is a small white flower which comes in small little groups, and she called it came from Aurobindo, the beauty in collective simplicity. Beauty in collective simplicity. We lost it soon after. It's a shame, but we're still trying to find it. It grows in Europe. I've been asking nurseries and people around to bring back this, what's called botanically Ornithogalum. Ornithogalum umbellatum, you know, that kind of double Dutch Latin. This is just to tell you that the flowers that Mother named at that time were absolutely linked with the growth of Aurobindo. It was a golden era. I can tell you we had flowers which I've never seen afterwards. And Mother named each one for Aurobindo. To bring you back a little earlier, when Aurobindo was in its inception in 1964, 65, 66, a beautiful hibiscus, light cream with a slight pink center, something of the touch of the divine love, but very subtle, sometimes even white, a large flower. Mother named it and wrote in her own handwriting, La Divinité, Godhead. And interestingly enough, each person who came and wanted to talk about Aurobindo, Mother would say, this is the flower for you. It's strange but true that these flowers came. These flowers manifested. These flowers were there. A bit later, we had another hibiscus which came from Aurobindo too, and Mother called it the beauty of supramental love. Excuse me. It's a very touching subject. And she would give this flower to those working for Aurobindo and say, this is the flower for you. While we were doing the commentaries, I put forward naturally some little questions in my head. And one of them was, but first, Mother, you gave Godhead, and now you're giving beauty of supramental love. So Mother said, both are flowers of Aurobindo, but the beauty of supramental love has the color of the soil of Aurobindo, which is so sweet that she remembered even the soil has its color, has its sacredness, shall we call it. Besides this, there were around 14 or 15 flowers named exclusively for Aurobindo. I can't remember them in order. I could have prepared myself well if I knew that I was going to speak only on this, but I just thought I'd mention it since we are gathered here in this very special moment before the anniversary also of Aurobindo. But there were flowers like the ideal of Aurobindo, the spiritual success of Aurobindo, the usefulness of Aurobindo. In fact, the usefulness of Aurobindo became the flower for the garden of utility. And I think the earliest were, I'm sure, the charm of Aurobindo and the beauty of Aurobindo. To this day, I still have difficulty in distinguishing between the beauty of Aurobindo and the charm of Aurobindo. They're so similar, and I have to go and look at the book to know whether I'm right or wrong. Because they're both pink, they're both single, they're both Hawaiian. One is a little more white on the edge. I think that is beauty. And the other charm, if I'm not mistaken, is a fully delicate pink with a little darker center. These were certainly among the first of the Aurobindo flowers. While doing the book, evidently the question arose whether we should use these names that Mother had for Aurobindo. And she said, does everybody know about Aurobindo? This was in 1970, 71. So she gave an alternative to each name, and she mostly replaced Aurobindo by new creation, beauty of the new creation, ideal of the new creation. But it wasn't always like that. It was, for instance, power of spiritual beauty. And that was what she named spiritual beauty of Aurobindo. So it wasn't a fixed rule. Naturally, Mother doesn't work by rules, fortunately, as she says. But in general, this was the name which we have put in the first edition of the book. And you know that in the colored edition we have also the name for Aurobindo. There is one more flower named for Aurobindo which grows in the countryside. It blooms in springtime, and not in springtime, late spring, usually after the arrival of the first rains and a sort of pinch of the heat of summer. It is miracle. And when Mother was shown this flower, she said, this is the air of Aurobindo. Can you imagine? The air of Aurobindo is a miracle. And Mother said, yes, both these names are there. There is another little story, since I'm in the storytelling mood, related to the naming of flowers. As we know, Mother entered into the consciousness of the flower, as she describes in the cherry tree. And identifying with that, she gave the spiritual name. But I remember once, when talking to Pavitra, in the days when I was sort of crazy about the names and what Mother has said about this flower, what Mother has called this flower, is this the right name, is this the wrong name? Pavitra told me this asked me this rather cryptic question. Well, do you think Mother named the flower for the flower? Or do you think she named the flower for us? At that moment in time, I was more or less convinced that she named the flower because that was the flower. But I have later come to know that the flower is for us. The flower is specifically meant for us, or for a work to be done, collectively, or even, I may venture to say, globally. And for this, as they say, and thereby hangs the tail. This is the tail. The gardener of the ashram, who was my dear friend, who had the permission to go to Mother any moment and show her a flower and ask, "Mother, what is this?" He spoke in English. He brought a flower from the countryside, from a little tree, which people call the Jerusalem thorn because it's really thorny. But strangely enough, the leaves are so lacy and delicate, the most delicate you can ever imagine, with tiny little leaflets hanging gently. It's a beautiful sight to behold. And it has bunches of little yellow flowers, which for me, in my mind, resembled service yellow, but with the little pink dots towards the center. And a fragrance which was rather special. So he told me quite often, whenever I took this to the Mother, no answer. He asked others also to take it to her in case they may have better luck. Now it so happened that a young girl living in Aurobindo went to the Mother on her birthday. She didn't know what to take with her, but she plucked from a tree, in particular, these flowers. She took it to the Mother, she offered it to the Mother. The Mother excitedly said, "Oh, this is lightness." She was so happy. When she came down from the Mother, she was telling everybody, "Mother has called this flower lightness. This is lightness." And do you know what she was aspiring to be? A ballet dancer. This was her dream of dreams, to be a ballet dancer. So you see that flowers have that very intimate connection with us. Since we're in a small gathering, rather intimate, I'll venture to tell you the significance of a flower of progress, which I knew was exactly for me. It's rather personal. I don't usually talk about these things, but since we're telling stories. She named it spasmodic but continuous progress. And I knew immediately this was me.
What does this particular progress?
Oh, this was, yes. Mother has named quite a few progress. Thank you for the question. This is a progress I hardly ever see. It is what you may call a marbled progress. You know that nowadays you have the marbling, so you have all these splashes and streaks. It was a violet progress with streaks of white on it. And out of curiosity we gave it to the Mother, and Mother named it this. She has named actually 2 or 3. Vital progress, you all know, which we are still attempting to achieve. And the integral progress, the white one, they are the common ones. Then, of course, now there are all the hybrids, but afterwards there was also the white with the red center, which was integral progress in matter. Matter is, of course, the dark color. And there was also white with a reddish center, and a little more pink on the petals, if I remember rightly. which he called constant progress in matter. So this was something like what in our language we call a sport. That means some erratic thing which comes from time to time, which Mother sort of gave this significance. I've rarely seen it. I don't know if anybody of you have seen it, but I saw it once, but then it was just on one little branch, not a constant, as you may say, phenomenon. I would like to let the flowers speak a little, in the sense that we have what we've already talked about, the divine love, for those who are not already familiar. And I would like to bring to you the form which we have nowadays, much lighter. We were very used to sweetness of the thought turned exclusively towards the divine. Possibly one of the longest significances given in the olden days. I mean, in days gone by. But then we got back this much lighter flower which he had named, but we had sort of lost it. And it is the contemplation of the divine, which I felt was a very beautiful complement to exclusive thought turned towards the divine. Just contemplation of the divine. And this now has become much more, shall I say, current, much more visible in our gardens. I'll come to the roses, or shall I deal with the roses first, since they are among the royalty. The strange thing about the meaning of roses, because she did revise to make it more simple for us to understand. But she did say that there was one rose called love from the divine. And to tell you the absolute truth, we've never been able to find out what was this love from the divine. All roses, you know, are love for the divine. But she says there is one rose called love from the divine. Which reminds me of also some of the old roses, you know, the small roses in bunches that you see on some of the not hybrid plants like these beautiful creations. We had tenderness for the divine and affection for the divine. But when Mother talks about it in the agenda, she calls it la tendresse du divin. That is to say, the tenderness of the divine. And we call it tenderness for the divine. In fact, between tenderness for the divine, affection for the divine, there's again this subtle difference which I really cannot tell you or draw a line between the two. It's so subtle that I think each one has to feel within themselves. But they are the small roses in bunches. And since we are telling stories of flowers named by the Mother, I would like to tell you of two flowers named by Sri Aurobindo. Simply because I was once shown, or rather told by a sadhak, that Sri Aurobindo had written to him that the flowers of Bilva, that is the sacred bilva to Shiva, were, I don't remember the exact word, maybe attitude de dévotion. And when we told this to the mother, of course the mother gave the name devotional attitude. That is the first flower. The second flower has an interesting story. In the book on yoga, we have that chapter on visions and symbols. And there's a small sentence that caught my attention. It was, small white roses. These are, by the way, you must remember, these are definitions given to visions seen or dreams that people had, and wrote questions that I saw a peacock, I saw a golden swan. Anyway, these are the definitions that were given by Sri Aurobindo. And against this equals, small white roses equals pure spiritual surrender. This was a name we did not have. So when we told the mother of this, she said, these are the, these are the small roses that come on a creeper without thorns, I believe. It's the common name in those days was prosperity, the trade name, and they come in little bunches, which was quite common. So this became the second name which we may attribute to Sri Aurobindo. But of course, the most marvelous of marvelous sentences said by Sri Aurobindo on flowers was when he was asked why Sri Aurobindo's compassion was so delicate and did not last for long. I think many of you know this, but for those who don't, it's worth repeating. He writes, my compassion does not wither with its symbol. Flowers are the moment's representation of things that are eternal. And the other sentence, of course, which I love of Sri Aurobindo is, flowers are very psychic, but they express it through silence and beauty. Even in Sri Aurobindo's plays, you have sometimes a reference to flowers, and the one that attracted me most was in a play of Vasudetta, when the two lovers are together, and he's describing a flower that he has brought. He says, see this flower I plucked below the stream? Each petal is a thought. Each petal is a thought. It was such a sweet way of putting the feeling of flowers. Now I must come to the flowers themselves. I will briefly go through the roses because this one is so beautiful. Flaming love for the divine. And a flower she loved to give to children. Whereas this poor fellow needs a little more attention. Light-colored roses she gave often to ladies, and red roses she gave to gentlemen. The significance of the red rose is human passions changed into love for the divine. And of course the lighter ones, the yellow one, is usually mental love for the divine or mental surrender. This was the flower which many of you know was chosen for the Garden of Light, which Mother took in the second session. I'm not going into great details, others will be here all night. This is the flower which was called, I don't remember what the original name was, but she called it, I think it was purified power, if I'm not mistaken. So in order to get, and not in order to, I'm very sorry to put Mother in a fix, but Mother changed the name to Light of the Purified Power. We have here one of the most beautiful flowers. We have several here. Mother named this Striving for Integral Wisdom. I was surprised why it was striving for integral wisdom when we already had integral wisdom. Sorry, you can see it? Integral wisdom comes from a tree, and the fragrance is extremely beautiful. In fact, it's not even completely white. It is greenish white. And the common wisdom is a pink flower, which is on a huge tree. Very, very beautiful, impressive tree. And so I was surprised to know that, in fact, some of these are much larger than this and very, very beautiful when they're fresh. I was surprised that Mother wanted it striving for integral wisdom. But then, as I thought over it, after all, integral wisdom grows on a tree, and besides which, it is fragrant, which is something extremely special. Before coming, I had an interesting thought. And this thought was related to trees. I thought to myself of the service tree in the center of the ashram above the samadhi. And I then thought of the banyan tree, the center of Aurobindo. And it suddenly dawned that service has been, and I believe still is, the symbol of the work in the ashram. And the banyan, unity, is the endeavor, the work which you may say has been offered in Aurobindo. I'm talking now of Aurobindo not only in the specific sense, but also in the general worldwide sense. And when I talk of the ashram, it is not just that little place, but the feeling of the ashram as a worldwide expression. That's how we came to trees. This is the most powerful of all flowers from the point of view of excuse me, Agni. The flower before was of this color, but not the pom-pom variety, but it is Agni. It has this beautiful salmon color, and sometimes it has as you can see perhaps inside, it has those red veins, a strong fire towards the center. Too much. The psychological perfection. If we talked of service and Banyan, we must not forget psychological perfection, because it has been and will be, I feel, our constant work. The mother even went to the extent of naming each single petal separately, which is much too complicated for me to understand. But she said that each time I give this flower, I give a different combination according to what the person requires. And this has been the flower that she would distribute nearly every day, because it was nearly this form, of course, but a little different, which grew all around, and especially in the ashram, especially in Nantai, in many of the local houses, it has been, this champa tree, as we call it in India, has been grown. Although Mother talks about the 5 psychological perfections, when Aurobindo describes this flower, he says, there are many perfections, and it varies a lot according to what the mother wants to give us. You may be questioning in your mind, what do I mean when I say Mother gives us? And here we come to the most intriguing question of, what do we really do now? How do flowers really affect us in our life? Is it the growing of flowers? Is it the offering of flowers? Is it the decoration with flowers? Is it the concentration on that quality which they represent? Is it the season in which nature has given us these flowers to awaken us to a new consciousness, with a sudden change of seasons, a sudden abundance as we see now, which I may, for those who have not been here before, this particular year is the most unique year from the point of view of nature that we have had. I believe I've never seen before, when flowers just burst forth even months before their season or out of season. So I think it is all of these things together that we must concentrate on. And particularly, as we said in the beginning, that we are the flower. We are the half-open bud that has to open and express the qualities which flowers have and have been given by the mother, I feel. Because if you ask me very frankly, I think the meaning of flowers is the integral yoga in a, shall we say, in a small packet or in a concise and very material form. This is what I sincerely feel about what has been called these mantras. So take it as you feel from within, because this is a personal and deep, what shall I call, discovery or adventure. I'm sure I cannot go through all the flowers which are here. As Aurobindo says, each petal is a thought, so this was a flower, since I saw it here, which took me a little by surprise, because when we were doing this with the mother, when we came to the Garden of Power, I immediately thought of dynamic power, the usual hibiscus flower which is also offered to Kali as a symbol of power. And Mother chose this aesthetic power, and it brings us to that, back to that subtle quality. Beauty is a great power. That was the commentary of the Mother. And then I understood how aesthetic power was the most appropriate to power rather than dynamic power, if I may be dramatic. There are two gardens which, since we're talking of gardens, were not named as hibiscus, were not chosen. When we came to riches, wealth, Mother said, but don't we have lilies and what are the others? I said cactus. So cactus, lilies, richesse, these were the flowers chosen for the center of the garden of wealth. And of course when we came right to the end, perfection, Mother said smilingly, but there's psychological perfection. So the varieties of psychological perfection were chosen for the garden of perfection, which brings round the full circle of the 12 gardens of Matu Mandir. I will take any specific question. If you have something which may have... Yes?
We spoke about Aurobindo's compassion. And nowadays we have so many different colors and varieties of this flower. But I feel, I don't know how you feel,
no, we clarified this with the Mother.
Yes.
Because by this time there was already the second form which I came from, I think from Thailand or from the Far East, yes, which has flat petals and which is quite common now. Mm-hmm. And Mother said all colors, all varieties, Aurobindo's compassion, which of course makes sense.
I always feel there's something very special about that vivid magenta that was perhaps the first.
Yes, that is true. The other day in the nursery I saw even the same form, but, excuse me, white and pink together, white and magenta, but exactly the same size, the same. Things are changing, and I'm sure that...
And I have another question. When you mentioned this first list that the Mother made,
yes,
she said Matu Mandir, love at the beginning, and then the names of the gardens, and then the Banya unity. So where
this was in French.
Yes.
And it was in black and white and nothing exactly specifically. When I asked, they said, these are the 12 gardens of the which will be for the Matrimandir.
But then where does the love come in our present arrangement of the gardens?
I've gone over this question for a long time and in many ways. And it's very, very simple. And it's just what Mother said in the very beginning. Matrimandir is love.
But it means we don't have the roses.
The love is in our hearts. There was a beautiful rose garden, in fact, in the vicinity. But that's right, even that. Yes, if you ask me frankly, my present feeling is simply this, that we are going forward. We're doing our best in the light that has been given us. And even before the gardens had, I mean, this is just a personal feeling, but when the Matrimandir was finished, and the attention, even the thought of making the 12 gardens, and nothing really had come up. But the feeling, I mean, I'm not the only one, but the feeling that when one entered that area was so beautiful, so touching, so living. If you ask me personally, it's as living as when you see from far a child go to the Samadhi. It is so powerful in the sense that it radiates and has radiated and is radiating. I'm sure mothers, with that choice, with that idea, with that spirit of Aurobindo, she prepared all that is coming now into manifestation through so many dedicated persons and dedicated efforts and sincere prayers, I'm sure, all over the world to bring it into concrete manifestation. Yes, that thought had actually troubled me for some time, but it doesn't trouble me at all anymore. It's the atmosphere itself is charged. And the Matrimandir already has been charged forever and forever and forevermore, as they say. After a little moment of silence, to just sort of gather ourselves, I propose that each of you selects a flower as we may say in that little game that's come out now, the Mother's blessings. This is how the Mother is blessing us and is blessing each of us in a special way. Thank you. I have a small request that we maintain this silence until we have left the room. Please come and take a flower that is for you.